And for those of you not familiar with SCORE, I would love to introduce you to SCORE. You are here for today for So You Want to Start a Nonprofit with Ramesh Advani. He's one of our SCORE Boston mentors, and we're very pleased that he is able to present this topic for us today. As we get going though, SCORE, the three things about SCORE that you need to know is that we have free business templates and information on the website. The websites are fantastic. I strongly encourage you to take a look at them. We're not just talking about templates for business plans. There's all kinds of things that you can download, marketing plans, financial reports, all kinds of great tidbits there. There's lots of blogs, there's videos you can watch. So lots of information available to you. Strongly encourage you to look for that information at the score.org website. The other role that we play in the small business arena is the webinars and workshops, mostly webinars, a few in-person workshops, training on any topic you can possibly imagine. We've probably done it, or if you feel we haven't, let us know what we're missing, and we'd love to bring that topic to you. The most important thing that SCORE does, however, is the mentoring. Our mentors are volunteers, and they come to us with different skills and different backgrounds to assist business clients. We're working with those that are trying to decide if small business ownership is right for them, and those that are in that planning phase, and those that are already in business. We work with folks on many different topics, business situations, and we would love to work with any of you that are out there today if we're not already. If you would be new to SCORE, then a beginning session is going to be learning and understanding what your challenges and goals are, and matching you to that mentor to help you, or so they can find out what you need, and bringing in others if needed to have answer all your questions. Getting a mentor is very easy. You can go to the score.org website. You can use that QR code. There's a blue box. You put in your zip code, and it will match you to the chapter nearest you. They will ask you questions, and then that chapter will use those questions and answers to find the mentor that can assist you with your situation. A lot of people don't know that we do have mentors that can help those with a nonprofit. We don't just work with for-profit clients. So we, like I said earlier, if you were here, we do have quite a few people planned on this call. So if you have a question for our presenter, if you could put it into the Q&A, that is just a little bit easier for us so we don't lose track of the questions. And you can use chat for everything else. And I mentioned as I got started that we are recording, and you can find the recording within about 24 to 48 hours on the score.org/Boston website. Under the local workshops on that blue bar and the little picture there, previously recorded webinars, that's where those that we are able to share are shown. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down, and I'm going to let Ramesh introduce himself and bring his slides up, and we're ready to go.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Can y'all see my slides?
Nope, not
yet.
Did
I
you...
need to share my screen. Okay, now?
Now we can, yes.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. This is not going to be a complicated webinar, and hopefully will give you a chance to ask any questions, as well as if after the seminar, a webinar, I should say, if you want to set up some time for some one-on-one counseling to be more specific, and information that you'd want me to hear from you and then try to help you. We have a group in the Boston chapter. We have different practice groups, and I'm part of the nonprofit practice group, and there are other counselors who also do counsel and mentor people who are interested in nonprofits. And so if you want to set up time with any of them, also Teresa will be happy to set it up. This being kind of a crazy month for me personally, I don't have any mentoring slots available for December, but certainly in January, I will be. So if you wanted to meet with me, we could do that in starting in January. But there are others also who could help you. The one other thing I wanted to tell you is, as part of this series, next week, I think it's on the 12th, and if you just get onto the SCORE Boston website, you'll be able to see that webinar. Another one of my SCORE mentoring colleagues, Sam Solomon, who's got a great background in the area of grants and foundations, money related stuff. So you could, if I were you, I would encourage you to sign up for Sam's webinar. And so let me just go ahead and get started. I will go slow, and then I will also pause. And if there are any questions, Teresa will let me know if any questions are there in the chat group. Okay, thank you. And here I go. So as far as introductions go, my background is I used to work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and one of the things that I did that really got me all excited just before I retired was I was asked by Governor Patrick, who I worked for, to oversee the federal grants management program when the stimulus program started in 2008. And that's when I became very familiar with the nonprofit sector and the groups that actually are the ones who deliver the services and spend the federal dollars and state dollars that are given out for delivering and meeting the mission of many nonprofits. Now, as you may know, Massachusetts is crawling with many, many nonprofits. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't start up a new one. However, if you wanted to even just get going, you could, unless it's a totally brilliant, crazy idea that nobody's ever had, you may want to consider joining an existing nonprofit and then peel off separately. There are over 8,000 nonprofits just in Massachusetts alone that serve our population, and there's always a need for more social services. So that's my background, and I asked those of you who are on the call if you could just put down a little bit of introduction for yourself. I'm going to talk about what is a nonprofit and how is it different and how it is the same as a for-profit. What are some of the musts for a nonprofit here in Massachusetts, or I should say here in the United States? I'm going to talk of certain key roles that have to be filled for a nonprofit. A little bit about money, a more in-depth look at fundraising. Sam will do that on the 12th. And also money for your role. A little bit about competition and collaboration. And then something which I think is probably the most important thing you will get from me in this slide webinar is your strengths and gaps. I want to just talk about that, and then the next steps. So that's the agenda for today's meeting. If you can just put down in the chat a little bit about your background, what nonprofit involvement you've had so far, or personal meaning relative to the area of the nonprofit that you're looking to start, or anything else you think is relevant to share, and also what you hope to get out of this webinar. So first thing is, what is a nonprofit? A nonprofit, and we love acronyms, it's an NPO, which is also called a non-business entity, a not-for-profit organization, or a nonprofit institution is a legal entity that is organized and operated for a collective, public, or social benefit. So there are many, many types of nonprofits, and a nonprofit is subject to the non-distribution constraint. Non-distribution of what? Or non-distribution of any revenues that exceed expenses. So normally revenues that exceed expenses, that sounds very foreboding. That's basically profit. And a for-profit organization can take that and can distribute that out. However, a nonprofit must take all revenues that exceed expenses and commit those for reinvestment into the organization's purpose or mission. And it cannot, those extra sources of funds cannot be used by private parties. So an individual who is also involved with the nonprofit is a private party, and we'll talk about what are some of the areas of exceptions. Okay, so that's what a nonprofit is, just a definitional thing. So the important thing is to know, how is it different and how is it the same as a for-profit? The differences are, a for-profit entity is one that operates as a business with an aim to generate a profit for its owners. So there could be one owner, it could be 10 owners, hundreds of owners, it could be a public entity, publicly traded, and after they pay their taxes on the profits, they take the balance and they can either redistribute the profits to the owners as dividends, or they can reinvest those extra revenues to help grow the business, to grow the company. A nonprofit does not distribute any of those monies. They also pay no taxes, and so all they do is they take all of it and put it back into the nonprofit organization. Another big difference is that no one owns a nonprofit. Even if you are going to start a nonprofit, you're not the owner. And that's what makes it a little bit more cumbersome from an administrative standpoint. And it very much addresses the next point. You can raise public funds. You don't have to use your own funds. You don't have to use funds from the people who are actually involved in the nonprofit, but you can go to the public and raise funds. And because of that, a nonprofit is held far more accountable and has to be very transparent in the use of money, the expenses, etc. And I'm sure you've read organizations, for-profit organizations that start a nonprofit, but then they end up using money that the nonprofit raises and they put it into their own pockets. That is illegal. So those are the differences between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. But there are some things that are the same as a for-profit. There are two of them which are very important. You must accomplish your mission and also make sure you make enough money to stay in business. What does that mean? You can't just say, I am going to have revenues or money coming in that covers all the expenses, because at the end of the day, because the expenses are subject to inflation and other things, unless you're making more money, more money coming in than what you're spending, you will not be able to stay in business. You will not be able to stay in existence. So that's the same requirement for a nonprofit as it is for a for-profit. And there are many people who understand this intellectually, but in practice, think that this is a real headache. because unlike a for-profit, a nonprofit cannot have a stream of revenues that covers all its expenses. They have to do fundraising. Even large, successful nonprofits like hospitals or educational institutions or large artistic institution like the Boston Symphony, which has been in existence for decades and decades, they also have to have fundraising done. So keep in mind that if you want to start a nonprofit, you have to be prepared to spend a lot of your energies besides running the nonprofit, also to do fundraising. The second thing, which is the same as a for-profit, is there is competition. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And where is the competition coming from? There are other nonprofits, and as I said, in Massachusetts, we have 8,000 nonprofits. There are quite a few that will be operating in the same segment, in the same part of the region where you're operating, or serving the same community that you want to serve from your nonprofit. So there's competition because people have a choice. They can either come to you or go to somebody else. And your objective is you want to be successful in your social mission. So keep in mind that there is competition, and I will give you some ideas on how do you address that. I'll pause here first to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, I have a question about turning a for-profit into a nonprofit, but I think that might be something that would probably be better addressed on a one-to-one or.
Yeah, yes. So basically, you can't, the short answer is you cannot turn a for-profit into a not-for-profit. What you can do is if you have a successful for-profit, you can set up another nonprofit entity that gets funding provided by the for-profit. So many large corporations, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, I can go on and on, Fidelity Investments, they all have, a lot of them have foundations and nonprofit organizations. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, great. So now you know what a nonprofit is and how is it different from a for-profit. So what are some of the things that you must keep in mind as you are forming a nonprofit? The first one is self-evident based on what I just said. Because you're a public entity, you have to be very transparent, and you must meet all state and federal requirements of reporting and filing, which includes filing for what is the equivalent of a tax return. Even though you're not paying taxes, all nonprofits have to file certain reports with the IRS. And if you're interested, when we meet, I could tell you, what that is. It's not a big deal, but it requires that you keep good records of your expenses and who are the people who are involved in running the nonprofit. The second must is you should have and you must have a well-documented set of your bylaws for your organization and the articles of organization, what led to the formation of the nonprofit. And once you have put this together, you then file it in Massachusetts. If your nonprofit is based in Massachusetts, if it's based in New Hampshire or Rhode Island or whatever, you would have to do it in that state. You would file it with the Secretary of State, the articles of organization, and also the name of your organization, etc., before you get involved with sending any application to the IRS for a 501 status. So you have to have that, and we can help you. We do have templates of bylaws and articles of organization, and we can give you examples, and then you can use those to formulate your organization bylaws. The third must is all of the officers, which is the executive management of the nonprofit, and any highly compensated employees, you have to be aware that you have to make sure that you're publicly reporting that information. So how do you publicly report it? You report it on the filing that you will do with the IRS. That'll have the name of the person, the title, as well as what they're making. You can also make them available on your nonprofit's website. And the fourth one, which I cannot overstate, as I said, the nonprofit is not owned by anybody. The nonprofit is run and managed by a board of directors. You have to make sure that you have a competent board of directors. They're the ones who are held responsible and accountable for all of the finances and provide governance and oversight of the operations. Anybody who's on the board of directors cannot have financial incentives for being on the board of the nonprofit. So very clear, they're not complicated requirements, easy to understand. Any questions on the musts?
I do not have any questions posted at this time.
Okay, great. So I will go on. What are the key rules that you have to make sure that you have in your nonprofit? The first is the board of directors that I mentioned. At a minimum, you have to have 3 positions that have to be filled and defined. I generally tell people you should start off with at least 5, and I'll tell you who the other 2 would be. So the first board position is the chair of the nonprofit, or the chair of the board. And many times the chair is the person who, like yourselves, those who are starting the nonprofit and want to run it. As you grow larger as an organization, you would hire an executive director who is compensated, who would basically be running the day-to-day operations of the nonprofit. But initially, the chair can also be the executive director. And if in playing the role of the executive director, the chair is compensated, in other words, use some of the money that you get either through fundraising or through the services that you provide, that has to be spelled out and approved by the board in the bylaws of the nonprofit. The key person who oversees the finances and signs off on any of the financial reports is the treasurer, which is, it cannot be the same person as the chair. You should have a separate person. And the third is the secretary or the clerk. Some people call them secretaries, some people call them clerk. That's the person who will keep all the minutes of the board meeting and put them up for the vote when you meet as a board, and will also do the filings with the state. Those are the minimum 3 board positions that the state talks about. But as I said, you should have at least 2 more. And the other 2 would be people who bring other skills to the board. And what are those skills? Skills are, they believe in the mission of the nonprofit. They may have had experience in that area that the nonprofit is going to work, but they might have other skills like fundraising. They might have a good network. So, the people who are on the board may not necessarily put money out of their own pocket, but if they have a good network, they would reach out to people who would then, they would be able to convince them that they should make donations. So try to have at least 5. A board, and the number of members you have on a board is spelled out in your bylaws. So you could start off with the bylaws that say the nonprofit would have 9 members or 11 members, but initially only fill 5. And you should always try to have odd number of members on the board of directors so that when there is voting, that can happen without any, any impasse that might arise during the voting process. You should also have people who come on your board, and these are details that you would get into the bylaws, has staggered terms. So let's say you might have in your bylaws, you might say someone who's on the board would be there for 3 years, but then you have so that there's continuity. You might have 2 members rolling off and 2 new people coming onto the board. So that's the board of directors is a key role. The second key role is the executive management, and you might have more people in the executive management as you grow larger. So for example, you might have an executive director, and you might also have a development officer. A development officer would be responsible to drive the fundraising process of the nonprofit. And an executive director and the chair will obviously also get involved with fundraising. It's important to know that when you do have an executive director, the executive director and the chair should have a very solid working relationship, because if that doesn't happen, then there's conflict, and that detracts from the mission of the nonprofit. The third key role is staff. The executive director cannot do everything, and the staff also, that's a compensated role. So the staff is to help you run the operations, and you would have staff in marketing, fundraising, finance, and information technology. Fundraising different from finance. I'm sure you understand that. And you might not initially start off by having all staff positions. You might have a vendor with whom you contract to provide accounting services or technology services or even marketing services, etc. But those are the key roles for a nonprofit. And as I said, the founder could be both a board member and an executive director initially, but then later on peel off the executive director position or peel off the chair position and continue as just the compensated executive director. I'll pause here. Any questions?
We do have quite a stack of questions, so let's see if we can. Let's see if we get through that. Is the chair the same as the board president?
Yes, some people call it one by one name, some by another.
Do you need to have your board in place before you make yourself official to the state?
You should have identified who will be on the board, because then when you do the filing with the state, you have to give their names and their addresses and their positions.
Can you have a nonprofit without a tax exempt status?
Yes, you could, but what I don't fully understand the implication of that. Does that mean that why are they forming a nonprofit? Why didn't they form a for-profit?
Right.
Let me just say one more thing on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I generally, when people come for counseling or mentoring for a nonprofit, I spend a lot of energies trying to probe the person, and I try to dissuade them from forming a nonprofit, because it's a lot easier to be in control of meeting your mission and getting things done as a for-profit than a nonprofit, because essentially as a nonprofit, really the board of directors decides what they're going to do. So for example, if you're very successful, the board of directors might decide that they want to take the mission in some other direction, and they don't want you to be involved. And you may have spent a lot of energies in your life trying to get this thing going. So you're always in greater control as a for-profit versus a nonprofit. But on the other hand, there's a lot of satisfaction of forming a nonprofit. So I just thought I'd throw that out.
Thank you. Yeah. Can a chair or treasurer be an executive director?
Yeah, like I said, a chair can also be an executive director initially. And then the articles of organization should spell out what the compensation would be for the executive director portion of the job, along with the job description, etc. But eventually it should be separated, especially the treasurer, because many nonprofits have over time had financial issues because the person who was responsible for, signing checks and putting money in the bank and all, people have absconded with the funds of the nonprofit.
Can a person be the executive manager of a nonprofit entity and a for-profit business at the same time if they do the same service?
Yeah, of course. If the board of directors of the nonprofit approves that and that's put in writing, and I don't know what the same service means. They also, for the services, they would be compensated separately by the for-profit and by the nonprofit.
Yeah, I'm
Or
going to
they could
say,
do the nonprofit pro bono.
yeah, and I'm going to say, I think there might be some other underlying information that we don't have on that. And that
Right.
person would benefit from a score mentor for sure to really get
Yeah.
the right answer.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned on the slide the key roles, executive management and staff compensated. What's the downside of volunteers in these roles? Having volunteers that are uncompensated in those other roles?
There is no downside other than to have them continue to offer those services. I mean, you may start off with all volunteers. A lot of nonprofits start off with volunteers and then they provide part-time compensation when funds are available. But eventually, if they're not compensated, the experience in this sector of the economy is that you either don't get efficient or good quality services, not productive, and then you're not able to sort of get them to do what you want by you meaning the board of directors. So over time that will backfire.
You had mentioned that the chair and the treasurer shouldn't be the same person. Is that a specific rule, or is that just a something that's wise to follow?
It's you should have two separate people. It's not just wise, it's just you need checks and balances on the board.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I understand the reasoning behind the for-profit control, but that might cause public funding issues, right? In other words, how would an NPO apply for public funding for a for-profit? I'm just to give you a chance to clarify what you were trying to. You had been talking about, because we had said, being a nonprofit without having the tax exempt. I think this is where that question spins off of.
Yeah, it's something we could take up offline in a course mentor session. Yeah. It's too vague to be able to to answer. For-profits and nonprofits are clearly separate, and the people who are involved, because the names are then also provided to the IRS and to the state, they would probably ask more questions. And also the other thing is there are two roles that I always tell people they have to make sure they hire and have them advise the nonprofit. One is legal counsel, and the other is your tax accountant. And legal counsel There are lots of law firms that will provide pro bono legal services. They'll also be able to clarify that for you.
Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and let you continue, and then we'll grab more questions again.
Okay.
I think, yeah. Okay, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah. So obviously the thing that is very important, even more important for a nonprofit than a for-profit, is money. The first one, of course, is you have to make sure you generate enough revenues to cover all your costs to meet your mission and stay in business. The second is the revenues that you get from the services you provide may not cover all your costs. So the first question that comes in mind, really, if a nonprofit is providing services, they don't all have to be free? No, they don't have to be free. However, because you have to be transparent, especially to your donors and to everybody else, you should really be charging for services at cost. If those same services, if just common sense, if there were people, I'll take an example, let's say there was a particular community that could get those services from the marketplace, why would they go for the same services to their church? Or why would they go to a nonprofit? So obviously, they would ideally like to get the services at no charge. But if you charge very nominal amounts of money, that's also fine. And that is a stream of revenues that comes from the operations of the nonprofit. It could also be that you have a stream of revenues. Let's say you have a nonprofit that is providing the physical human services free of charge, but you could have a website where you try to sell items that people will buy, other people will buy who are not using the services, and that would generate revenues for you. So in addition to revenues from services, that'll still not cover all your costs, because all your costs are human services, human costs, the people, the staff, and everybody. And over time, human services costs are always going to go up. And so you have to do fundraising from donors and also apply for grants. And there are many, many sources of grants that are available, state, federal, private organizations. So it's important to know that it's essential that you do fundraising. In the area of fundraising, once you make an application to somebody, it's much, much more successful if your cause is showing results, that your donor is a repeat donor. Whether it's a donor, it's an individual or an organization, if they believe in your cause and you are showing results, you're showing outcomes and benefits, they will give you a donation again. So there are people who will give you a donation and give you a grant where the funds will be available for 3 years in a row. And those are very, very good funders of your nonprofit. Therefore, it's very important that in order to get this money, you have to make sure you're tracking your results, your outcomes based on your mission and what you said you would make happen, and provide good, timely communications so that the donors are supportive to you. So communications, either if you have 2 or 3 large donors, you'd make sure you maintain a relationship and network with them. You'd also probably have a newsletter or an email that goes out that tells people, what was done last quarter versus last year, etc. And so when you want money, you have to make sure you understand what all you have to do. You have to be very good at telling the story of the results of your nonprofit. Any questions? It's pretty self-evident, but Any questions?
Well, if we're talking about money, someone asked if a nonprofit can take out loans.
Yes, if there is somebody who is willing to give you a loan, to get a loan, you will have to provide collateral. And yeah, there could be, like, for example, I know a nonprofit that I have counseled. They actually own a building in JP area, which it's an old historic building that people rent to have weddings and receptions. And so they could have a mortgage. They had a mortgage on at one time when they wanted to redo the facility and spruce it up. They got a loan. So yeah, you have to have some collateral to get a loan. Nothing's to stop you.
Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I mentioned this at the start, competition and collaboration. Unlike a for-profit, there's always competition, usually very little chance of collaboration. They would get acquired or bought out. But in the nonprofit world, you need to be aware of who else is in the space you're operating. You should learn from them and then also see what you can do better. And if there are things that you do better, or it's a niche area that you're operating, or a community that you want to service and they're not servicing, why you should think about exploring with them who is willing to collaborate and cooperate. Because it could be that, the sum is greater than each of its parts. And there could be synergies between organizations to benefit the clients. So you have to keep that in mind and have some market awareness, some marketing you need to do, and build a relationship. Now there may be people, nonprofits who are working in a similar field. They might say, no, we don't want to. So that's fine. If they don't want to, they don't want to. Or there might be a nonprofit that is operating in a nearby state and is interested in expanding to the Commonwealth. You could, interact with them. So those are just some ideas to keep in mind. This is probably the most important slide that I'd like to share with all of you, and that is, you need to do a real good inventory of yourself as an individual. The first question you should ask yourself, and this is something you do for yourself without getting involved with anybody else. Then if you've got some other people who are willing to help you in your mission and be on your board, examine these same questions with them. First of all, will your circumstances allow you to spend the time and energy to be able to stick with this nonprofit until it becomes an established nonprofit in the area? Do this inventory and find out what is it that you're good at. And find out who else you know who would be interested and actively involved in the same cause. You cannot be good at everything, and just like any team sport, a nonprofit is a team sport. You can't do it alone. You should find out what you're not good at. Actually, be very honest about what you're not good at, because then you can recruit resources and skills to make up for that, and get them to possibly also be on your board. How will you? So one is to find out your strengths, and the other is then how will you go about finding people and funding resources to meet the mission and help you do what you're not good at? This is something you can do brainstorming with a SCORE mentor. The next one, it's very important when you're forming any organization, a for-profit, not-for-profit, are you capable of motivating and leading a team? Of being a coach? You can't do it all yourself, but on the other hand, and you get people involved, but you're not capable of motivating people or, forgiving them for their mistakes and teaching them and learning from them, then you should reconsider what you're doing. And once you get everything going, you will find that you will develop people and train people, and you're going to have to sort of let go. And generally, I always tell people the founders of anything are very unwilling to take a chance and trust those and delegate because they're afraid of mistakes. But mistakes will happen. They're human, and but you have to be able to think about that. So I'm just putting these thoughts in your head so that you think about it and do a little self-check and evaluation before you get into the details of, oh, I'm going to form the 501c3. Oh, I'm going to register with the state, and blah, 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 before you get into all of that. So what are the next steps? As I've been talking, think about all that you've learned, write out your responses, gather your thoughts, and we'll be happy to have further conversations and guidance. Like I said, next week there's a workshop on grant making, on grants and sources of funding. This is our website, boston.score.org, and you can send in a request, and Teresa will be happy to set up time with the SCORE counselor. And and it's free. You don't lose anything by talking to them, and it's all confidential. It's only between you and your SCORE mentor. So those are all my slides. I'll open it up for any final questions or any comments.
Yeah, I do have a question. I just want to start it with saying that we do have a risk management webinar coming up. So you might want to check out that. But because this question says, is it mandatory to have insurance for the board of director members to protect personal assets if any legal issues come up? As the board of directors is possibly being held responsible?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's one of the, when we get into the detail, though, that is one insurance that insurance companies will give you, DNI. It's insurance for the directors because the nonprofit could get sued, and the people who are getting sued would be the board, and all nonprofits essentially do buy that insurance. It's not very expensive, but you definitely need that.
Okay. And I do have two other questions that very much go into specifics for their situation. And I just very much, especially the one about the museum, please schedule with a SCORE mentor and go through this with someone. We do have people that can on the legal and accounting and the nonprofit side that can talk to you. I really very much want to strongly encourage you to do that. And there's another question about an educational program as well. We want to keep it general for everyone to get information. So please, these two people, if you would reach out to us separately, that would be great. See, there's a question in chat. What's a JP?
Oh, Jamaica Plain. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I think I got all the questions in Q&A. Let's see. Yeah, I think we got it. I think we got everybody. But
okay.
But again, you can always reach out to us at any time. We're happy to schedule you with one of our nonprofit mentors to get your questions answered. And yeah, I think we're all set. Thanks, Ramesh, for a really great job.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming, and good luck with what you're trying to do.
All right. Bye.
Bye.